This week on Let's Talk About Mental Health, I'm talking about how focusing on personal growth improves your well-being. So let's get talking. This is Let's Talk About Mental Health, a weekly podcast about mental health and well-being hosted by Jeremy Godwin. Let's talk about mental health, because the more we talk about it, the easier it gets. Hello and welcome to episode 37 of Let's Talk About Mental Health, the weekly podcast about improving your mental health and well-being. I'm Jeremy Godwin. Thank you for joining me. This week I'm talking about growth. I'll be discussing the role of personal growth in living a better life and exploring ways that you can incorporate a growth mindset into your day-to-day living. So, let's talk. Whether you care to admit it or not, you are not the same person today that you were yesterday. And you are definitely not the same person that you were a year ago, let alone a decade ago. The world is certainly not the same as it was in the past. And since a huge part of life is tied up in how we respond to the world around us, it must stand to reason that as the world changes, so do we. There is, however, a big difference between change and growth, which is what I'll be discussing this week. Choosing to grow means consciously choosing to be a little bit better each day, which is easier said than done. Every single experience that we have changes us in some way, but whether or not we choose to grow from it is up to us. In the words of Karen Kaiser Clark, life is change, growth is optional, choose wisely. So what is growth? Growth is about developing and improving. It's about wanting to be better and taking action to make it happen. It's about improving all aspects of your life, your relationship with yourself and your intimate relationships, as well as the ones that you have with your family and friends. It's also about how you make a living, how you achieve your aspirations, your creative outlets, your connection with your broader community, and so on and so forth. It all ties into having healthy self-esteem and being satisfied with the person that you are, as well as the person that you're becoming. It's about having the humility to know that you are not perfect and that there's always room for improvement, combined with a drive to be the best possible version of yourself. Why is that so important? Because what's the point of life if not to be better? In episode 35, Insecurity, I talked about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, in which Abraham Maslow suggested that once we've got our core needs managed, safety, security, etc., we then start to focus on higher level needs like love and belonging, and ultimately on self-actualization. And self-actualization is about achieving our full potential. The desire to be better is common among many of us. For example, in the US alone, the self-help industry is valued at over $10 billion a year and growing, which is a fairly massive amount of money, but it's also a pretty clear indicator that there are a lot of us who are seeking to improve ourselves. I think part of that comes down to the fact that in most things that happen in life, we really only have three options: grow, stagnate, or regress. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. My partner loves gardening, and as I've seen our garden take shape more and more over the past couple of years, it's interesting to note the similarities between the effort involved in gardening and in personal growth. And in both cases, if you put in the work to tend the soil, plant the seeds, and then nurture them, then eventually beautiful things will grow. But if you don't put in the effort, then things will stagnate. And eventually, they'll even go backwards. Because over time, nature will reclaim all of the work that was done if you don't stay on top of it. Making things grow takes time and patience and nurturing. But from small beginnings, big things will grow. It doesn't just happen because you suddenly decide to make it happen. It takes work. But that work has a massive payoff, a better life. So how exactly does personal growth help you to have a better life? I'd imagine that for most of us, the idea of a better life involves good mental health and well-being. Well, I hope so at least. And good mental health isn't just a case of suddenly deciding one day to think positively and being done with it, although it is undeniable that how you think has a direct effect on your mental health. More on that in a minute. However, it's a case of putting in the effort every day to improve every aspect of your life and well-being. The physical, mental, spiritual, emotional, social, and financial aspects of your life. How you relate to the world and how you relate to yourself will have a direct impact on your overall life satisfaction, which might sound like some huge philosophical statement to make, but really it comes down to common sense. If you want a better life, then strive to be better. Again, it's not as easy as just making the decision because everything involves hard work, but it does require you to start by making a decision that having a better life is a priority for you and for those that you care about. And then making choices every day that align with that decision. In other words, having a growth mindset. Now, I talk regularly in this program about 3 foundations for good mental health, and they extend for living a happier life. Be kind, do no harm, and give more than you take. If you apply those 3 philosophies to personal growth and make the choice to keep them front of mind in everything that you do, say, and feel, then you're going to be taking major steps towards growing as a person, which can only have positive benefits for you and for those around you. Growth is about consciously choosing to be a little bit better each day, as well as looking at how you can grow from the things that happen to you, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And that's what I mean by a growth mindset in this context. In my case, I know without question that the years that I spent dealing with depression and anxiety aren't just years that I lost, they're years that forced me to grow. I mean, when I look back on it, what choice did I have? What was the alternative other than to grow? Because if you don't consciously grow from what's happening to you, then, like I said before, you stagnate. Or worse yet, you regress or go backwards, especially if you're resisting the idea of growing. Could you imagine where we'd all be if, as a society, we had resisted the changes that have happened over the past decades and centuries? I mean, imagine a world where we still were powered by steam engines, or where we hadn't evolved beyond dial-up internet. Ugh, gross. Change is inevitable, both on a personal level and in terms of society. And so it just becomes a question of whether or not you want to be dragged kicking and screaming into tomorrow, or if you would prefer to maintain your dignity and evolve into something better, to grow into something better. I certainly am hoping that for all of us, it's the latter. And so with that in mind, let's get into the how-to part of this week's episode. How can you incorporate a growth mindset into your daily life? Like most things, the idea of growth starts with choice. The choice to be a little better every day. Realistically, that's a decision that only you can make for yourself. But if the alternative is to feel stuck, or even worse, to go backwards, then hopefully making the choice to pursue growth is a logical one. The idea of growth is about finding sustainable and healthy ways to be better, to grow. And so let's talk through some of those in more detail. Let's start with the one that I bang on about all the time, letting go of the past. It's really important, if you're passionate about growing, if you're committed to growing, don't cling to the past. Look, things change, and you either accept it and grow, or you resist it and suffer. I've talked in other episodes previously about topics like acceptance, baggage, and letting go. They even had their own episodes 36, 7, and 32 respectively. You can find those at letstalkaboutmentalhealth.com.au/episodes. And the reason why I talk about these subjects, and they come up time after time after time in many different episodes, is for very good reason. Because when you hold on to things from the past, they block you from having a better life today and tomorrow. Let go. Now, part of letting go is my next point, which is learning from the past. And this, again, is one that I talk about very often in Let's Talk About Mental Health. And it's a big part of self-awareness in terms of being able to understand where you are today and how you got here. Because unless you understand the how and the why of why you are where you are, how can you then work out where you're heading towards and what you need to do to achieve that? So by understanding where you are today and how you got here, you can then make choices that steer you in the direction that you want to head in the future. For example, I've talked a lot in this show about my own journey with working in the corporate sector in what now feels like a past life, and then realizing that it wasn't for me. And so I've had to learn a whole bunch of lessons from those experiences, and then put in place changes that have helped me to change course. I went back to university and completed a degree in my chosen field. I put in time and effort to explore different options, and now I'm doing the kind of work that makes me feel fulfilled. The thing is that none of that would have happened if I hadn't have learned from the past and then made changes accordingly, because I would have just ended up repeating the same mistakes over and over again. If you don't learn from your mistakes, then you're doomed to repeat them. Now, speaking of mistakes, Be okay with making mistakes. I talked about this all the way back in episode 2 because we so often have this ridiculous notion of needing to be perfect or being terrified of doing something that makes us look stupid. But that's bullshit. And all that does is hold you back from trying new things. You know, I've used this quote before by Jesse Potter. If you always do what you've always done, you always get what you've always gotten. You're never going to grow and you're never going to achieve anything new unless you're prepared to get a little bit messy. So be okay with making mistakes. Next, be clear about what you want to focus on in terms of growth. Take time out for reflection, which is something I talked about in episode 12, and really work on your self-awareness. Be honest with yourself about your strengths, as well as your opportunities for development. Look, we all have aspects of ourselves in which we could stand to be better, even if we might try to deny them. Think about your overall health and well-being, as well as how you interact with others and the wider world, and consider all aspects of yourself. For example, how you might be able to grow physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, socially, and financially. Once you're clear about what you want to focus on in terms of growth, then it's up to you to do the work every day. Just making the decision to change isn't enough. Sorry to break that to you. Find self-development tools and resources that work for you and use them often. There are lots of different options out there, but as I've said many times before, please make sure that you use qualified sources. Why do you think I so often mention my background in studying psychology and sociology? And also, why do you think that I make a point in most episodes of quoting reputable sources for research? And the reason why is because there are far too many people, most of who I think are well-meaning, who are providing advice based on their opinions rather than fact and research. The danger with that is that you can wind up putting time and effort into a so-called solution that either doesn't work or, in the worst case scenario, actually does more harm than good. I think it is important for us to focus on reputable, reliable sources. I don't know how or why we ended up in a world where suddenly so many people are questioning hard facts and evidence, but I really don't think we want to go back to the world that we had hundreds of years ago, where we try to cure ourselves with leeches because we think, that being sick means that you must have too much blood in your body, or maybe it's just ghosts in your bones, who knows. Seriously though, find reputable sources. Oh, and speaking of reputable, it doesn't have to cost you an arm and a leg. It should not cost you a fortune for these sources. The other day I saw an ad for a gratitude journal that was nearly $80, and that's ridiculous. You don't have to spend a fortune to be a better person. I have a whole bunch of episodes in my back catalogue that you can go through and check out for addressing specific development areas, and it's all free. Like I said before, go to letstalkaboutmentalhealth.com.au/episodes to get started. But my main message here is find what works for you. Part of doing that is to get to know your learning preferences and incorporate them into the work you're doing. I've mentioned a few times before that in a past life I was a trainer, and one of the things that we focused on was making sure that we adapted our learning materials based on the multiple different learning styles. And look, we each have our own ways that we like to learn. For example, there's visual, auditory, kinesthetic. I'm not going to bore you with all of the theory about it. There's a lot of stuff on the internet to help you find your preferred styles. I'll include a link to one in the transcript as well. So take the time to understand what works best for you and then apply that to the self-development work that you do. For example, I'm quite visual, and even though I love reading for pleasure, I find it exhausting from a learning viewpoint. So self-help books just don't cut it for me. Instead, I tend to rely more on videos and other media that I find more engaging. So for example, if you like Brené Brown's stuff, then I highly recommend her TED Talk, The Power of Vulnerability, as well as if you have Netflix, check out her excellent film, The Call to Courage. It's a live talk that she gave that was filmed and broadcast on Netflix. I absolutely loved it. Anyway, my point is, find what feels most engaging for you and that adapts to your learning preferences. Moving on to my next point, do things that make you feel uncomfortable often. And every now and then, do something that absolutely terrifies the shit out of you. Look, you do not grow by remaining where you are and just doing the same things that you've always done. That is the definition of stagnating. Get outside of what makes you feel comfortable, try new things, and challenge yourself. It's also important to cultivate positive growth-focused relationships, which is a really nice way of saying not to spend your time around shitty people. Look, we might as well talk about the elephant in the room here. There will no doubt be people in your life who are growth focused, and there will also be other people who will try to hold you back or even drag you down. You choose who gets your time and your energy. And if a relationship of any kind isn't constructive and mutually supportive, then something has to give, because you just cannot let other people drag you down. If other people don't have your best interests in mind, then give them a chance to change, and if they don't, then be prepared to walk away in order to avoid any damage that their behavior might do. You need to surround yourself with positive relationships that are focused on growth. Moving on to my next point, know that you will never know everything, and that every experience has something to teach you. This might be a bit random, but for those of you that listen on a regular basis, it's probably not that random. There was a song from the Netherlands submitted for Eurovision 2020 called Grow, and of course I'm about to quote it because, I can't help myself. But it has a really simple lyric, and I think it explains what I'm talking about here with this, know that you'll never know everything thing. Plus it gives me a chance to quote Eurovision, so, happiness for me. The quote is, "The more I learn, the less I know. Through every high and every low, I'll grow." I like that lyric. I like the simplicity of it because the reality is, and if there's anything that I've learned through my years on the planet so far, you will never stop learning. And even the unpleasant stuff that happens in life has just as much to teach you as the good stuff, if not more. My next point is to focus on what you want instead of what you don't want. There's a good reason that I don't focus that much on the idea of mental illness in this podcast, but I talk more about mental health. What you focus on is where your energy goes. And the more you focus on positive stuff, then the more positive stuff that you'll have to focus on, which is something I talked about back in episode 31, Mindset. You need to focus on what feels right to you and what makes your heart sing. I found that when I was studying psychology that I was far more interested in the things that we can do every day to help ourselves to grow than I was in the idea of treating disorders. There are plenty of people qualified to do that and who are passionate about that work of treating disorders. So instead, I choose to focus on what I enjoy and what makes me feel passionate, personal growth and self-development. That doesn't mean that I think that you can just magically cure yourself if you have an illness. I don't. But it means that I know with all my heart and soul that health is an inside job, one that benefits from external assistance, but something that must be driven by yourself. We can all be shown 1,000 different tools to improve different aspects of our health, our physical, mental, spiritual, emotional, social, and financial health. But it's what you do with those tools that makes the difference. So focus on what's important to you and focus on what you want instead of what you don't want. My next point is partially about individual mindsets, and it's also partially about how you move through this world that we're all a part of. And it is to be part of the solution instead of focusing on the problems. Growth isn't just about you as an individual. It's also about the contributions that you make to the world. Unfortunately, there continue to be far too many people in positions of power who are using their own hatred and greed to cause society to stagnate and even regress. Instead of focusing on the things that divide us, choose to focus on what unites us and consider how you can contribute to a better world. That doesn't mean that you don't call out injustices. I've talked about this in previous episodes. Yes, you do call out injustices, but it also means that we focus more on what we can do and what unites us rather than focusing on the negative. And all of this might sound out of place to some people in a podcast about mental health, but I assure you it is not, because we are each affected by the external world just as much as we are by what's happening internally, and you cannot have one without the other. You are part of a community, and we are all united by our humanity, regardless of what we look like or what we believe. So the idea of sustainable growth involves building greater unity rather than tearing others down. We live in an amazing world with amazing cultures and civilizations, both present and past. And that brings me to my next point, which is to see the world and learn from it. And let's be realistic, thanks to coronavirus, we're talking about virtually seeing the world and learning from it. But regardless, part of growth is about expanding your horizons and learning about different ways of living and different points of view, and asking more questions and exploring, and looking at how our shared history unites us. I don't know about you, but for me, my favorite places in the entire world are museums. Now, I know that for some of them, it's potentially a sensitive issue, but putting aside the ethical implications of empire and colonialism for now, museums for me are places of absolute awe and wonder because they are tangible evidence of the growth of our species. We are here today because of everything and everyone that has come before us. And when I talk about learning from the past, I mean that in terms of both your own past as well as our collective past. The good, the bad, and the ugly of human history has so much to teach us, and it challenges us to grow, to be better. We have a lot to be proud of, and if we each choose to be better every day, then we will have even more to be proud of in the future. And that starts with each of us making the decision to grow, to be better. My next point is to remind yourself regularly what you're doing and why. If you want to be better, tell yourself that every single day, and let that drive you to make better choices. Self-improvement and growth is an ongoing journey, and it's one that you'll hopefully be working on for the rest of your life, because wanting to feel better and be better is actually a really rewarding way of life. So keep on reminding yourself what you're doing and why. And then my final piece of advice on how to focus on growth is to keep going. Don't give up when the going gets tough, because it will. When the going gets tough, that's when growth is more important than ever. Right now, we are knee-deep in a global pandemic that is challenging everything we've ever known, and the only way through it is through it. When we come out the other side, let's be better for what has happened. Let's grow from this, because the alternative is unthinkable. In each of our lives, we will inevitably face difficulties, but they are part of the experience of growing. In the words of M. Scott Peck, moments of guilt, moments of contrition, moments when we are lacking in self-esteem, moments when we are bearing the trial of being displeasing to ourselves are essential to our growth. Because when it comes to growth, what it all boils down to is this. Change is one of the few things in this life that we can all rely on. It's as inevitable as taxes. But the difference between change and growth is choice. Change will happen whether you like it or not. But it's up to each of us to choose to grow in response to circumstances and events. I don't know about you, but I don't want to be perfect. I just want to be better. I want to know that every day I am moving forward in some increment, no matter how small, rather than just treading water, or worse yet, going backwards. And to do that, ultimately, is my choice. If we want to be better, then we have to make the choice every day to put our personal growth at the forefront of everything that we do, say, and feel, so that we can all make the most out of this thing that we call life, and hopefully leave this world just a little bit better than how it was when we entered it. That's nearly it for this week. Every episode I like to finish up by sharing a quote about the week's topic and encouraging you to take a few moments to reflect on it and consider what it means for you. This week's quote is a Chinese proverb, and it is, "Be not afraid of growing slowly. Be afraid of standing still." Let me repeat that. Be not afraid of growing slowly. Be afraid of standing still. Alright, that's it for this week. Next week I'll be talking about relationships. I'll be discussing how our intimate relationships can affect our mental health and well-being, and how to build and maintain better relationships, regardless of whether you're single or attached. I hope you'll join me for that episode, which will be released on Monday morning in Australia and New Zealand, Sunday evening in the UK, Ireland and Europe, and Sunday afternoon in the US and Canada. You can find past episodes and additional content at the website, which is letstalkaboutmentalhealth.com.au. That's letstalkaboutmentalhealth.com.au. You can also find Let's Talk About Mental Health on Instagram, Facebook and Pinterest at LTA Mental Health. That's at LTA Mental Health. If you liked this episode, please take a moment to leave a 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice and tell someone else that you know about the show, because word of mouth really helps new people to discover the program. Thank you very much for joining me today. Look after yourself and make a conscious effort to share positivity and kindness out into the world, because you get back what you put out. Take care and talk to you next time.